everybody, and welcome to The Backline with Rob and Adam. My name is Adam Colley, alumnag of the Second City Main Stage.
My name is Rob Norman. I'm also an alumni of the Second City, and I'm also the author of the cool improv book, Improvising Now, A Practical Guide to Modern Improv.
What an intro. Can you tell we haven't done this in a while?
I've done it. I don't know what you've been doing.
Wait, you've been releasing episodes without me?
Yeah, people like it a lot more.
A lot more streamlined, a lot less cereal and cobblestone. Interesting. Rob, we've been away for a couple weeks. We've been touring, we've been traveling, we've been doing lots of things, but not releasing episodes. What have you been up to?
Not editing podcasts, that's for sure. You know that thing where people go, hey, I want you to work on this thing. You want to work on this new project? And they say to you, actually, I got a lot of stuff on my plate. I don't think I have the bandwidth for that right now. How do you do that, Adam? Who has the ability to set boundaries in that way, or also know how much work is on their plate? I don't think I've ever said no to someone before.
Weird.
I just do it all.
But you have a lot on your plate, always. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know, because you do seem like you're capable enough to say, I actually don't think I can do that. Maybe next time.
I feel like I'm happiest when I'm busy. So as long as I'm just suffocating in things, then I'll be happy. But then I'm constantly stressed out. And these necessarily aren't huge projects or projects that pay out a lot. I'm as poor as I always was. I'm just busy and poor, which I think is important.
It does feel like that has to be the mindset. And you remember when we did an episode on how to survive? It's like, well, if you love this art like we all do, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. And part of that is you're going to have to piecemeal your life with other things to survive. And, I think my wife and I always talk about, like, up until recently, we were very much independent contractors, all that stuff. And it's like, oh, I'm so stressed. I have so many of these little things. It's very hard to schedule. And it's like, yeah, that's rough. But imagine the opposite. I have nothing to do. No one's needing me or wanting me to do anything. And that has its own stresses. So neither one is great, but I think knowing which one fits your personality better.
Well, and there's also this other piece, too, with an improv where if you are busy, people offer you more things because they see that you're working and you're everywhere and you're doing all these things. So sometimes it just even makes sense just to be out in the world doing things because maybe you don't need the work now, but you're going to in 2 months from now. So you might as well be out there and be busy and doing shows or teaching classes or whatever else it is.
This feels like a very separate episode. But I feel like, if you're out there and you're listening and you're like, oh, but I don't know if I want to produce that show, or I don't know if I want to put out that video because what if it's not that good and people judge me? I'm like, half of the things that people see are the promotion of the things you're doing. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do people watch the video that you've put out. Do people analyze the art that you've done? It's just like, oh, you're promoting you've done art? Wow, that's cool. You must be good. And they just make those assumptions. But very rarely is anyone looking at your material, studying it, thinking how bad or unfunny you are. It just doesn't happen.
I mean, if I don't have time to watch She-Hulk, I'm probably not going to watch your video where you're playing your mom in a wig.
There you go. Well, Rob, one of the things we've been busy with is a little bit of touring. We went to Vancouver and Victoria, and we spent a lot of time together. How was it for you?
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure being on tour with you. I have the best time. Not even a joke here. Just had a great time with you.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, I had a great time too. And it's always fun, like, we've got a chance to go to places together where we've never been, like either one of us have ever been. So it's not like one person's leading the other around. It's very much like, okay, well, one day we're going to the magic store, and then one day we're going to find old wooden cobblestone in alleyways. Okay, and then in between those times, we get food. and that's always a good time.
Yeah.
But man, if you have not been to Victoria, Canada, whew, what a time. We had a great time. It's Canada's, it's on the very, very west coast, the island, Vancouver Island. Beautiful. When you think about how big Canada is, it's faster for us to get to Europe from Toronto than getting to Victoria.
Whoa.
So that's bonkers. But Garden City Comedy brought us out. We had a wonderful time teaching workshops, doing shows, some sold-out shows, which was always fun. And then we took the ferry over to Vancouver, rocked some workshops with the Improv Center there on Granville Island. I ate some more food, and overall had a great time.
Yeah, we were eating food every day.
Yeah, we really went for it. We had 3 meals, I believe, every day.
Ate the whole thing
Absolutely
each
wild.
time, too. Very different. Very unique.
Well, Rob, today, now that we are back, we wanted to talk about a very important topic. A topic that you know a lot about, and a topic that I may know a lot about. I don't even know what this topic is. You're like, I want to talk about the bullet. What the hell is the bullet? I know the magic bullet. I know a bullet train, but improv, I've never heard of this. What is the bullet?
You've never heard taking the bullet.
Never.
What about in stand-up at Humber Comedy College when you were learning about stand-up? You ever heard the term the bullet?
Never.
Okay, well, looks like there's going to be an education for you today, Adam Colley.
Oh, I'm excited. Okay, what the hell's a bullet?
If you're a stand-up, you get booked on a stand-up show. What is the worst slot in a running order for stand-ups?
I guess it depends, but first is really tough. You got to set that
First.
tone.
That is called the bullet. You're taking the bullet for the whole night. So going up first in stand-up is called taking the bullet. It's called the bullet. Nobody wants that slot. Unless you're doing like a bunch of shows that night that you have to go from like show to show and you've like cascaded them all very delicately. You never want to go first. Because audiences who are cold, not warmed up audiences, are more reluctant to laugh. And so going up first actually taxes you more. And that's why we put headliners at the end, because we want everyone to leave with having a good time, laughing the hardest at the end of the night. But also, it would be a real waste to put your headliners on first, because they would spend all of their best material and the best material of the night just getting people feeling comfortable and kind of relaxed in their chairs. So that's what it's called. It's called the bullet, something that we never talk about in improv, but something that actually is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, you think of our experience more with live sketch and improv. You look at Second City, well, their openers, to avoid this idea of a bullet, it's like the opener, everybody's in it. You're like, what, we're all in it? Yeah, everybody's in it. It's probably going to be a big musical number, because even if it's not the funniest, we need to wow the audience. We need to make them excited for what's to come, get them energized. So that opener usually has everybody gets one joke. There's usually a song, big lights, big sound, big energy. And then we get into what we do, which is scenic satire. But you'd think, well, if that's what you do at Second City, just start off that way. And I guess to your point, this is to avoid this idea of putting a scene in that bullet slot.
Yeah, and like, you know, I feel like with Second City openers, I feel like Second City openers are laugh optional. And what I mean by that is, here's a big spectacle. You could laugh if you wanted to. On a Friday and Saturday night, you could laugh if you're ready to laugh. But on a Tuesday night, when the theater is half full, it doesn't feel weird that you're not laughing. That's where that energy and spectacle and music comes from. And like sometimes in a show, you know, when we have a very big punchline, when you have a punchline that's so clear, it's so clear that we're going for the laugh, you force a decision from the audience to decide, is what you just said funny? Is this scene funny? Is this scene not funny? You know, I would never want to force that in an opener of a show I was directing, because I don't want them to choose yet. I want them to like me before I force them to choose in our first scene. And in fact, in our first scene, we'll talk about this later about first scenes of shows, but in our first scene, I'm going to dial it down to 2 or 3, because again, I don't want to be going for these big swings when the audience isn't capable of receiving those big swings. So yes, a lot of strategy is going into running orders and who goes first and what kind of material goes in that first slot.
Okay, now that I know what you're talking about, this is something that we would call, I guess it's not the same thing, but whenever you do a move like this, and we'll get to this later in the episode, I always framed it as jumping on the grenade.
Mm-hmm.
Just another term. It's all war terms.
Mm-hmm.
But basically it's like any art form that's publicly performed, it feels like you're going to war, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going up against this obstacle, which is your own ego, your own shame, an audience of judging people, and figuring out how do we manage this. And so I guess naturally this fight or flight thing comes to our mind, and we've labeled all these awful things as war terms.
I don't know what you're talking about. When I go on stage, I have no shame. The audiences instantly love me and go, that was perfect. And I go, yeah, as it should be. And then we walk off, and then that's the end of the night for me. Is it different for you? Do you feel shame when you perform? Yikes.
Yikes. Wow. That's really eye-opening. You should bring some of that to your life, because the people in your life don't really find you interesting at all. Rob, let's take a little break, and then let's come back and get back into Bullet Town, USA. Okay, so we're back. We're talking about this idea of that first slot that sets the tone, that's probably got a lot of pressure based around it. So this kind of came from the idea of that first slot in a stand-up show, but now we're talking about improv. So let's say whatever the show is, you are on first. Either you are the first scene in a montage, you are the first scene in a scenic show. Do we have to change anything we do, or is this kind of like, you're there, just improvise, you'll figure it out?
Well, I would say whatever works for you, go do that thing. Like if you can kill by doing a big, loud character that's very silly and the audience is into it right away, then that's great. Then you don't need me. Bye. See you later. But if someone was struggling, or if a team was struggling consistently with this problem, I might ask them to take a look at what their 1A looks like. And most often, when I'm talking with troops about this, I'm talking about it in the context of a herald. So in a herald, we have an opener, which is very similar to a Second City opener, which is something that's a little bit more esoteric, it's a little bit weird, lots of energy, but not necessarily the funniest thing in the world. And it's designed to not necessarily be the funniest thing in the world. We're just trying to do some table setting for the show, set up the atmosphere, set up the energy, let people kind of figure out what improv is before we kind of go into it. After that big opener, we're going to drop into our first scene of the set, and we usually call that 1A. So any scene that I do in the first round that's not a tag in, I would call it 1A. If it was a tag-in of that scene, I would label it as a 2A or a 3A, depending on how many times we've seen this kind of character or storyline before. So in the 1A scene, I probably want to do two things. Number one, this would be the slot where I would want to create something that's as close to theater as possible. A human relationship in a real space with human behavior. I want to do this because if people have never seen improv before, this will be the most recognizable and easily digestible format for them to watch. In the same way that you might go see some kind of summer stock theater production. If it could live within that world, somewhere within that world, then I think we're good to go because most people understand what that is and understand how to watch what that scene is. So that's the first part. Human, grounded, nothing too technical, nothing too funky, no high concept premise. The other thing I'm also thinking about in 1A is to try and give an energy that is different or opposite of what we've just done in the opener. Because of heralds, because they're so thematic, if we had a theme like war, for example, or suggestion was war, and you and I are angry and we're screaming and we're throwing grenades and we're shooting guns and it's really loud, then for me, the thing I would want to do in 1A is do something that's quieter, less active, smaller, because the audience has just already seen that. So by oscillating energies here, we get a little boost. It would be a mistake to do a very loud, aggressive opener and then do a very loud and aggressive 1A. It would just be too much of the same thing back to back. So those would be the two things I would be thinking about when doing a herald or a montage about what that 1A looks like.
So if I was up and coming, I'd be like, well, that kind of sounds risky. Like low energy, starting low. What if they make the choice early of like, this isn't as... people aren't trying to wow me as an audience. This seems like they're not trying, or they're not giving it their all. I've seen people be super physical on stage. I've seen it. But then you give them something like this. Can you talk a bit about, like, what is it... Are you investing in your show's future? Like, what does it feel like to hold back when you're like, I could go harder, right? It's telling an athlete to, like, don't go as hard in the first period. Just hold off because you're investing in the end of the game. Like, talk me through it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the idea that you would treat each scene as its own success or failure is fine. If you were new to improv, I could see why you go on stage, you do as much physical work as you can, as much yelling as you can, and you say as many jokes as you can. And you just try and bludgeon the audience until they laugh over and over again. You repeat this process. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you and I, being old improvisers, very old men, like you look it, but I actually am old. And for us, we know what the limits of a show are going to be. Like you and I know we could go on stage and just do as many jokes as we want. You can't get blood from a stone. There's going to be ebbs and flows. No matter how good your work is, there will be ebbs and flows. And for us, we're trying to create a kind of arc. And that arc is a rising energy of the show overall. And so we're going from quieter to louder throughout the show. Just like if I was directing a main stage show, I would say, oh, well, I don't want to put all of my loud, energetic sketches at the beginning of the show because either A, we're going to run out of energetic scenes and I'm going to have to put a quieter show near the end of the show when we're supposed to be ramping up to a big finish, big finale. We're going to start putting quieter stuff in there. That would be a mistake. Or the other option would be we just try and do the same thing over and over again. And over a while, the audience gets kind of numb to that and they just kind of roll their eyes. So for us, doing something quieter doesn't necessarily mean less funny. You know, if you were to say to me, hey, Rob, you know, there's 5 people in the audience tonight. There would be no point in you and I doing a loud, high energy physical show. Because 5 people are looking around the theater. They're feeling kind of uncomfortable. They're feeling self-conscious. There's not enough people. Something went wrong with the show. So they're not going to give you much laughs. So all of a sudden, I have to create a kind of more... I have to perform for a more introverted crowd. And I need to kind of create something that's a little bit, maybe not like belly laughs, but more a quieter kind of laugh. That's the kind of laugh I'm fostering with a smaller show. Well, fostering that kind of smaller, more intimate laugh at the beginning of a show, again, isn't less funny. It's just a different kind of laugh.
So we're talking about these openers and then this kind of bullet scene. What are the things that what should they be striving to accomplish in an opener? Like, what does a good opener do?
Great. This is a great question. You know, recently we were putting together this show for our friends from UCB. They're called Big Grande. And they have this podcast called The Teacher's Lounge. And so they're coming from New York to play, and we wanted to give them an opener. They had 30 minutes of an improv show, and they needed something at the beginning to warm up the crowd and also just kind of fill out the night. And so we were really trying to figure out, well, what should that show look like and what should that show feel like? And the answer was, well, we want to introduce everyone to improv. We want to get everyone kind of warmed up. We want everyone laughing and having a good time. We're going to do a little bit of crowd work off the top just to make sure everybody knows this is the general energy. You're safe here. This is a place to laugh and relax. It's not stressful place. No one's going to be roasting you in the front row. None of that. And then just kind of demonstrate what improv is. So give them a really good example of what an improv scene is. And you're basically just kind of laying the foundation. So when this headlining group, we don't really use that term in improv, but that's what it is, a headlining group, someone who's here to close the night, they don't have to do any of that work. When they go do a tag in, everyone in the audience knows what a tag in is. If they try and do some kind of advanced technical move, the audience gets it. They're on board. They're excited. There's no kind of like stopping to figure out what this is. If you've ever done improv in a variety show, you can kind of feel what it feels like to not perform with a warmed up crowd. Like there's a ventriloquist, someone plays the clarinet, and then you try and do your herald, and it just feels off. It doesn't feel like when you're doing a herald at Herald Night. And the difference for that is they're just educated. They just understand what you're doing when you go on stage because they watch 3 other teams do it already. So yeah, the opener is doing all of those things. It's creating atmosphere, it's educating, and hopefully it's getting people laughing.
And then, so if that's the case, and that is a success, and you're backstage and you're thinking, okay, well, now we got to do this bullet scene. What does a good bullet or kind of 1A scene look like?
I mean, I love doing that first scene off the top of the show. And if I'm the most experienced person in the show, I will usually try and do that scene. Number one, like I'm not worried if I don't get the most laughs in the night by going first. That doesn't bother me anymore. Secondly, sometimes when the lights go out, you can kind of see some apprehension. And the rest of the cast, they figure out when they want to walk out for their scene for the night. So jumping on that grenade, as you described earlier, going out first, really kind of setting the tone, allows other people on stage even to get more comfortable, become more relaxed. That scene's going well. They're going, oh, yeah, okay. If Rob got a laugh from doing that joke, which isn't that funny, then I feel safe making this kind of move in the show. Or I go and make that move and they go, ooh, audience did not like that joke from Rob. Okay, so I got to change my game plan. Like all of these calculations are happening in your brain, whether you're aware of them or not when you're on stage. So being the first person to jump on that grenade can really like save a show. Having that person. It's actually interesting. There are a couple improvisers in our community who you might watch them on stage and you might go, well, that person's not my favorite improviser. I like this person. I think they're funnier. I like their characters better. But then you look at that one improviser and you go, wait, they were in this troupe and that troupe and this troupe and that, and they're all successful troupes. And my favorite improviser, they've never been in a successful troupe. Why? Why is this one person in all these troupes? Well, most likely they're a glue player. They're the person who's doing these little moves that no one sees, which is like jumping on the grenade in 1A and always making sure that the table is set so other people can shine. If you don't have those players, your show can really suffer.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about the dynamic of being on a team with the same consistent players. Mm-hmm. You've got rehearsals, you've got a coach, and you kind of learn who those players naturally are. And then you can say, or hopefully be challenged to say, hey, Rob, I know this isn't your bag, but like for the next few shows, what happens if you take that bullet? Can we see what happens? And then all of a sudden, the naturally, I am as well, of a first player out. If I'm told, like, hey, man, for the next few shows, hang back, that would be a challenge for me. And that would be something where I'm like, okay, what happens when I'm the 4th scene in and that's my first scene? Well, I'm going less and less on instinct, and now I'm more and more seeing what's already been out there. I've got a lot more mental work to do. So again, it's not good or bad, but when you're on a team consistently, you get to learn what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you're uncomfortable with, and then hopefully have a safe environment where you get to get better at all of those things. But as you said, those individual players, it's a very odd thing to be like, I'm a free agent. I've got carte blanche with any show I do because no one's holding me accountable.
It's so funny because earlier in this episode, you were kind of doing that devil's advocate thing where you were asking me, shouldn't I just do the funniest scene I can in 1A? And listening to you talk now to kind of the conversation we were having at the beginning of this podcast, you sound like you're a veteran who's been in war. Like you've been in war for 30 years. And the question you were asking me earlier is someone who read about war in a textbook. Where you're like, my job is just to be funny. I'm going to go crush it. I'm going to go kill it. But the reality of someone who's doing shows night after night with big crowds, you figure out really quickly that there's limitations to good scenes. There's limitations to how funny you can be or how many laughs you can get. And the rest of it is strategy. The rest of it's resource management. Like, that's a strange thing that we never talk about, which is like, okay, the show has this many laughs. How do we space them out correctly?
Oof. And the like, when you make these moves, these strategic moves, you're probably not going to get a lot of accolades or response from the audience. You might just make the show better. And that may not feel as rewarding on the surface, but I always think, like, when people are doing improv auditions, you know, depending on the theater, you're hopefully going to have a group of adjudicators that are experienced. And if you're in an improv scene and it's like, what happens if someone, you know, starts spouting all of this who, what, where at me and yelling at me and swearing at me or whatever it is, just like ruining the scene. It's like, well, you don't have to fall into that trap. Hold your ground, do the things, choose your deal, all this kind of stuff where it's like, people will see you got paired up with someone who is inexperienced or nervous. They will hopefully be able to say, in spite of all that, you held your own, you tried to support them, you're on the team. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing happens when you're in your community, that you may not get the laughs that you want that show from the crowd. But if you are an up-and-comer or you're looking to get on a team or get hired or whatever it is, people will notice those things, right? Those things are obvious to the more experienced players or the producers. So it has a lot of value. And I mean, if we're talking about improv as a supportive art form, people are going to look to you on your team and be like, wow, you actually took that bullet for me? You jumped on that grenade? Like, I'm going to be on the lookout for, if ever I can support you, I will. And that's what makes a great team, is that that unconditional support. And if someone falters, you take up their role. Like, it happens all the time in sports. But in improv, I think it can get a little confusing because the nature of it is so random.
It's interesting being on stage with good players when a show goes wrong, and it hits different people at different times, but suddenly we all feel it. We all feel like something went wrong, and it's a bad feeling. Like, you're on stage with 100 people and suddenly you feel like you're performing at a jam. Like, that's how the laughter feels. It's all like scattered and it's weird. You know, I think on some level, people go, oh, I like playing with the people that when we do shows together, it never feels like that. It never goes off the rails that way. When I play with you, for some reason, some magical reason, I always feel really safe. I can take big risks. I can do all these things. I feel like the audience is with me. I feel like my team is with me. I'm invincible. I can do anything. So that is the bullet player. The bullet player is doing all this imaginary work, probably at their own expense. Because, like, let's be honest too, like, you know, when you're jumping out into 1A, it's not a great showcase for you, right? Like, you're doing so much labor. And if people don't know you and they're watching you play, they go, yeah, that guy was fine. My favorite guy was that third guy in. Mm-hmm. Whoa, she was so great. She said so many messed up things that was so funny. The first guy, He was whatever. He was oatmeal. And I think that's a medal. It's a badge of honor to be able to do that, to be invisible.
It's you talk a lot about I read the Maple Leaf report cards after every game. There's a writer who watches the game, gives everybody a mark, and explains their game. And a lot of the time, they'll talk about some of the defensemen, and they'll just be like, "I didn't even notice them all game," and it's like, right, that's a good thing. They did their work. They made no flashy plays. They just were solid. And we have these players where it's like no one talks about them. No one buys their jerseys. No one's excited about them. But everybody on the team is like, oh, without them, we'd be fucked. Absolutely fucked. And the fact that you guys don't notice them is because you're not a hockey player or you're not an improviser of like, oh, you can't even see the things that are happening that this person is doing. And the improvisers on stage, they value them so hard. I think about after an opener, that first relationship two-hander on a Second City main stage show. Never the best scene in the show. Never. There's 3 places where the best scene of the show can possibly go, and this is up for debate. Everybody has their own little thoughts on it. Rob, do you know which 3 I'm thinking? The 4th slot, the end of the first act, or the end of the whole show. Those are where you want to put your best scene. It's never the first. But we need a scene. We need something to carry us into the rest of the show, to ease the audience into it. And if you are doing that on an improv stage, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting so that others can shine. No one's going to remember that first scene just because it's an improv show. We're at a show where there's a lot of information, a lot of entertainment hitting you, and it's probably going to be 25 minutes to 45 minutes. No one's going to remember it. But if you have the confidence and the wherewithal to say, this isn't my only scene, but I'm okay to burn one of mine to support the rest of the show. It doesn't mean it has to be a bad scene, or it will be a bad scene. We just know it will not be the scene of the show. And that's okay.
Yeah, and like, again, if you're doing that relationship scene in a Second City show, there's benefits there too. You have a grace period. Like, you don't necessarily need to be the funniest scene in the show because the audience isn't even looking for that. So if you want to act in a Second City show, well, you got 2 slots. You got the first scene after the opener, and then you got the swamp in the second act. And that's it.
Usually when the servers are giving out the bills.
Yeah.
That's
You're
the
acting
scene where you have
in
that...
the swamp. Yeah.
Always a rough one to be on stage for.
Oof, rough.
Well, Rob, so anything else that you can think of? Is there a reason that someone shouldn't take the bullet? Is there anything that you can think of on the opposite side of this, of what are some warning signs? What are some things that you should be prepared for? Or some reasons where you're like, maybe if you are the bullet taker, maybe it's time to take a step back?
Well, I mean, I think there's a good reason to take a step back, which is you force someone else to jump into that position. You know, if I was taking the bullet every single night, I would probably feel pretty resentful. So the idea that I'm letting someone else do it and we're taking turns, I think is great for the overall health of the show and also just for our personal development. There's lots of questions there, Adam. When would you not necessarily take a bullet? I mean, maybe if you are the second show of the night, maybe it becomes less important that after your opener, you have a grounded scene because the audience is already warmed up in a weird way. You're not your own show. Your show's kind of connected to the opening improv troupe that came before you. So you can kind of build off their absurdity in a weird way. Everyone's warmed up. Everyone's loose. You still have to make sure the audience gets to know you and like you. But I think you can play a little bit more fast and furious. So that's a good sign about being in the second half of a show. Am I missing something with these questions?
Just something I would think about is guesting on shows or having guests of shows. On the main stage, after the sketch portion, we do the improv set. And often you have older alumni or celebrities come in and guest with you. And that's something where it's like, don't make them take the bullet. But a nice thing to do is take the bullet with them, because they are the person who is, if you have a troupe that's established and you have someone guesting, taking care of them and getting them involved in the show as early as possible, just to get their feet wet and let them to feel comfortable, is a nice thing to do. So it's not about holding back and letting them do it. It's going in there with them and saying, I'm an established member of this show. You are the new person who maybe the audience doesn't know, or you don't know our style as well. I'm going to jump in and take the bullet with you, so that the audience kind of sees that integration as like, oh, we like this person too. Okay. And for the rest of the show, they get more and more reps to establish themselves in front of that new audience.
Yeah, and I would say
if you are guesting on a show, I was going to say, if you are guesting on a show, I would, unless you are pulled into that first scene, I would probably not jump into that first scene, because I want to let the people whose show this is set the tone for the show they want. I'm a guest here, and therefore, unless I'm pulled in, I'm probably going to hold back.
I'm going all in. First scene, I'm in. Because if I don't get into that first scene, I'm going to feel anxiety. So for me, especially that main stage show, when I was coming up, I was in Turco or Edco or whatever, and I was joining them, I always got in first. Because I went, this is going to be bad. I know it's going to be bad. But chances are I'm going to get another shot at it. And the audience already knows this cast. They already love this cast. So I got to get them loving me as quickly as possible if I'm going to stand out in this show tonight. So for me, it was always get in early, get in often.
Bros. Well, what do people out there think? Do you have experience taking the bullet, or do you have another term for it, or a way to handle it? Is it as important to you in your community? You can always reach out to us at The Backline Pod on Facebook, Twitter, at The Backline Podcast, on Instagram for sick pictures of touring. Rob, is there anything on stage, off stage that you are excited about right now?
You know, for some reason, I don't know why, it feels like maybe everyone's kind of coming back to live events. And there's a lot of shows being made. And so I'm getting a couple emails here and there. I'm for my own shows, I'm also kind of in the same kind of boat where everybody needs a poster, it feels like. Getting a lot of poster requests. And that's the thing I used to do when I was first starting out. I couldn't improvise, but ooh, did I take one graphic design class in university, and boy, did it pay off. So it's very funny to return to my roots, hopping back into Photoshop and making posters for folks. No charge, just doing it for free for friends, but ooh, fun thing to do.
Yeah, you definitely have a poster aesthetic that I think is very clearly your own, which is probably a blessing and a curse. Because everybody will be like, oh, can you do the thing that you do, but like for me and different, but the same. Thank you.
Well, I sent this morning making a poster for your show. And it's very different than what I normally make. So this is a show at UCB. I don't know what's going to happen when you see this poster. I don't have an email from you being like, can we talk about it? But no revisions, not getting paid, so there's no revisions on this one.
Hey, it's funny, not getting paid and no revisions does not mean there won't be notes. It's just who I am. Yes, we always appreciate your artwork, Rob, because you're doing posters for me, which is great. Back in LA doing some live shows, which is very exciting. This Thursday, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but Thursday, 10 p.m. at the Pack Theater, we're bringing Party Hard Party to LA once again. So that's always fun. And then November 18th at UCB, we are doing a show called 7 Minutes in Heaven 14 improvisers doing duo slots. The theme is like a 90s pop and chips party. And it's an incredible cast. We got Nicole Byer, Betsy Sidaro, star of the podcast Jason DeRoss, myself. That's at UCB Franklin, November 18th, 10 p.m. Be there and be square.
Sounds great. Sounds like a great cast. Missing some of the magic, but, you know, pretty good. Pretty good cast.
Rob, anytime you're ready. LA's waiting for you, baby.
You know, when I get to the point where I'm flying to LA to pay $400 to do one improv show, then flying back home the same night, that'll be a magical day in my life.
Maybe it'll be next week.
We'll see.
This podcast is brought to you by the Sonar Network. If you like the podcast, subscribe. Write a little note that says how much you enjoy it. Because then other improvisers can find it. And you'll be like, hey, I know you. You're an improviser. Hey, when I'm in your town, can I improvise? And it just creates a big community. You could rate and review on Apple Podcasts. And Robbie Norman, you and I are back on track. So we will see everybody next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Show me how to fight for now, and I'll tell you, baby, it was easy coming back here to you once I figured it out. You were right here all along, 'cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me. I couldn't get any bigger with anyone else beside me, and now it's clear as this promise that we're making two reflections into one. 'Cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me, staring back at me. Aren't you something, an original? 'Cause it doesn't seem nearly as simple, and I can't help but stare, 'cause I see truth somewhere in your eyes. I can't ever change without you. You reflect me, I love that about you. And if I could, I would look at us all the time. 'Cause with your hand in my hand and a pocket full of soap, I can tell you there's no place we couldn't go. Just put your hand on the glass, I'll be trying to pull you through. You just gotta be strong, 'cause I don't wanna lose you now. I'm looking right at the other half of me. The vacancy that's out of my heart is a space, and now you're home. Show me how to fight for now, and I'll tell you, baby, it was easy coming back here to you once I figured it out. You were right here all along, 'cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me. I couldn't get any bigger with anyone else beside me, and now it's clear as this promise that we're making two reflections into one. 'Cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me, staring back at me. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. I can see you looking back at me. Keep your eyes on me, baby, keep your eyes on me. 'Cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me. I couldn't get any bigger with anyone else beside me, and now it's clear as this promise that we're making two reflections into one. 'Cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me, staring back at me.